don't think I've ever streamed live on YouTube before, Natalie. Don't know if you have.
Well, that's a first for me too. So
we'll give it one more minute and let a few more people come in.
There's always something new to learn. Always something new.
All right, I think we will kick off if you are ready, Natalie. So good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world today. Thank you so much for choosing to spend some time with Natalie and I today to talk about parenting and creating deeper connections with your children. I'll do a little housekeeping before we get into the main part of the session today. So this webinar is being recorded, so don't worry if you need to drop off to tend to a crying infant, pull a toddler down from a bookcase, or ferry a teenager somewhere. There may be more dad jokes throughout, but I feel like this is the only place I can get away with them. And the Q&A function is available today. So please do pop questions in there and we'll monitor them and get to as many of them as we can in the Q&A at the end. So let's kick it off with some intros. Myself, I'm Matt Jackson, based here in NYC. I have the privilege to lead our North American operations as we continue to grow and scale internationally at Unmind. I've spent the vast majority of my career in the health and benefits space across the world and have had a passion for the well-being side of things throughout that entire time. I know that there are a large number of Unmind users on the webinar today, so welcome. But for those of you who are unfamiliar, Unmind is a workplace mental well-being platform, and our mission is to improve the mental well-being of 10 million people in organizations across the world. Outside of work, I spend my time with my wife, Alicia, and our two children. So Madeline, who is turning 5 in 2 weeks' time, and Jamie, who's currently living the dream as a wild and wonderful 2.5-year-old. I am super excited today to be joined by Natalie Costa. So I will hand it over to you, Natalie, to say hello.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you. Yes, and my name is Natalie Costa. I'm the founder of Power Thoughts, which is a coaching and teaching service that I created to help children tap into the power of their own thoughts, really to help them recognize that they don't have to believe every thought they think or respond to everything they feel, and ultimately giving them the tools that supports their mental and emotional well-being. I'm South African born and raised, so I've also got a background in teaching. I actually initially qualified to be a teacher. Also got a keen interest in psychology, and it was coming up to my 6th year at uni, and I was still staying at home. And I thought, well, I could apply for my master's in ed psych, or I could just actually apply what I'm teaching because I need to get a job. So I decided to jump on the bandwagon that a lot of South Africans did back in 2006 and come to the UK with the intention of teaching and then going back. But that never happened. Ended up staying here. It's definitely been a join the dot experience getting me to where I am today, as I like to say. I've also dabbled a bit in the fitness industry. That's actually where I met my husband. I was one of those annoying, well, you either love us or you hate us, spin instructors that would shout at you and tell you to do more. I don't do that anymore. And at the moment, well, we've moved just outside of London, so I'm still kind of getting accustomed to village life. We're not far, but I must be honest, I'm still finding it a bit of a challenge. I'm a city girl. But Matt, I'm really interested to know, because I know we've had quite a few conversations, but how has your perception of children and mental health shifted or changed, especially in terms of you becoming a dad as well as working for Unmind? How's that kind of, what's your perception when it comes to children and mental health?
So I'd say it's actually the reason that I joined Unmind. So like many of the people on the webinar today, I was an Unmind user, and that started in November 2018. At that time, Madeline had just turned 2, and Jamie had surprised us, arriving 2 months early, spending a little time in the NICU. So I was going through that life transformation that everybody goes through when you're embarking on parenthood. I found myself juggling work, traveling a lot, learning about parenting. I had little sleep. I was experiencing that transition from having little to no responsibility to a hell of a lot of responsibility. My relationship was changing with my wife as we became parents. And I'm very aware that these are challenges that most, if not all, parents face, and relatively low intensity to what most may face, actually. But it was putting a lot of pressure on my mental health. And I went through all of the motions. I was short on patience. I was easily frustrated. I was overwhelmed. I sometimes felt resentment to my new life as a parent. I felt the parent guilt and so on. I guess I felt all of the things that you think you shouldn't say out loud as a parent. And Unmind was rolled out to me at my previous employer, and it couldn't have come at a better time. So I used it as a resource to learn about my mental health, why I was feeling the way I felt, how to manage that. But I also started learning about my children's mental health. And on one particular series that I'll highlight later on, it provided me with practical advice about how I interact with them. And a lot of it seemed like common sense. A lot of it seemed really, really simple, but it's the kind of thing that when you're overwhelmed and you're in the moment, you don't necessarily always default to. So a couple of things happened then to your question. I had my epiphany about mental health not being binary. It's something that we have all of the time that you need to be on top of, but also that I wasn't the first parent in the world feeling the way that I did. And as a side note, actually from that point on, I made it my mission to work for Unmind. And 16 months later, my dreams came true. So ultimately, I'm a lot more sensitive to the impact that my children have on my mental health. But I also recognize that I have a responsibility to help them understand mental health from the earliest age possible, so that they aren't having their epiphany at the age of 32 like I did.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, you could see I was nodding along and I really could resonate with so much of what you said there. And something that you touched on right at the end as well, in, that epiphany that you reached, why do we need to wait until, I'm 32? And that really is going to put goosebumps out. I tell the story all the time, but it's still something that I think, that's what I found when I was a teacher in the classroom. And I also had my own challenges with mental health. So I, had my bouts of anxiety. I was diagnosed actually with anxiety and depression in my teens, and it's something I'm very much aware of. And when I was in year 6, specifically year 6, these group of children who were busy preparing for secondary school, and I was working with a few younger kids doing the 11+ exams. So I don't know if any parents who are familiar with the 7+ or 11+ exams that we've got in the UK to get into certain schools. But there's a lot of processes in terms of verbal and non-verbal reasoning, and children have to really think about what shapes and patterns fit into things. And that really made me think. It was like, we spend so much time teaching our children how to think, how to problem solve, how to critically analyze. But where at that time, on the curriculum, were we really teaching them about their thoughts, that you don't have to believe every thought that you think, and also about their feelings and their emotions, why I feel a certain way and why I sometimes respond in this way, and that it's not just me that feels like this. And I mean, selfishly, I think, I sort of created Power Thoughts for younger Natalie, because for me, it was just so important. Why do we have to wait? Why can't we start making mental health accessible to children so that they can start to develop more helpful and nourishing habits, So initially, I set out to work with children, but equally that quickly expanded to parents as well. Because as I'm sure you're also aware, there's no manual that comes with your child and says on page 107, this is what you do. That would be amazing, but it just doesn't happen, right? So we're figuring these things out as we go. And I think as well, it also, for many of the parents I work with, and my own experience included, it wasn't modeled to me. These sort of, mental health, emotions, thoughts, those things just weren't really spoken about. So I always say to parents as well, that you are very much a learner alongside with your child. And as you are learning about your mental health, what you can do to support yours, what you can do to support theirs, they are learning too. And I think, that's just really important to remember, because I think we could, as parents, and I speak to so many, put a lot of guilt and pressure on ourselves that I should have all of these things. And I just think just recognizing that actually, hold on, I'm learning too. And that kind of takes me into today. And I'm really excited to be sharing with all of you some strategies and some practical tips that you can go away and use. But before I crack on, and we do have some polls coming in as well, I've got a few questions for you. Have you ever witnessed your child perhaps get angry, frustrated, overwhelmed, maybe lost their homework last minute or forgot their homework or their PE kit? Though I know there's many scenarios that I can think of like that. Or have there been times that you've witnessed what I call the ugly cry? So the sobbing, the tears. I had a mum on the phone the other day and said, my daughter's sobbing on the floor and I can't get her to do what I want her to do. And no judgment as well if you've perhaps felt like doing this as well. Just let's be honest, no judgment if that's maybe been you. And then, have there been times that you just are really struggling to connect with your child? And you also just, the feeling of guilt, I think, is a big thing as well. We feel that we're not spending enough quality time with our children. So from these scenarios, I'd be keen to know in the poll, and hopefully I can see that the poll come up. Can you perhaps relate, in the last 2 weeks, have there been moments when you could maybe relate to any of these feelings? So do let us know. I know what my answer is, and I'm just putting myself in there as well. So. Sometimes, yeah, all the time. So it seems like the feeling, yeah, we seem to have a relatable feeling, definitely. So, and if you can relate, then absolutely no, please know you're not alone. And my intention for the next 20 minutes or so is to provide you with some practical strategies and tools that you can go away and begin to use this evening so that you're able to start developing those deeper and more harmonious connections with your children. The dancing is optional, and I promise you the tools that I'll be sharing with you today is also not going to take up a lot of time. These are just little things that you can go away and start to implement in your everyday life. Just as a quick side note, I will be sharing quite a bit, so please don't feel that you have to use it all. Almost treat this as your personal pick and mix. So take those strategies that you feel resonates with you, and you can always come back to the rest later on. I also want to say a very big thank you. I sort of went through some of the questions and the comments that some of you had left prior to this. So thank you so much for that. Hopefully what I covered today will cover most of those points, but I'm also going to direct you to other places as well and other resources that I'll share with you at the end as well. So to kick us right off, when it comes to connecting with our children, one of the first strategies that I'd really like to invite you to take on board is really looking at beginning to be more mindful of managing our expectations when it comes to our children. When we can begin to understand, what's actually going on for them, why they behave and respond in the way that they do, even when it sometimes seems really irrational, that's going to help us to connect in a deeper way. Now, I spend a lot of time helping children understand, what's actually going on in your brain when you feel stressed, angry, worried, or anxious. And I'm going to share with you a really easy exercise that you can go away and use to help explain this to your child as well. But in a nutshell, what's actually going on inside their brain is that our child's brain is still wired quite differently to ours because it's still developing. Their emotional hub of the brain is far more advanced and developed than the logical, rational side of the brain. So the part of the brain that's responsible for reasoning, for understanding, the ability to think clearly, to make those smart choices, that part of the brain, as I sometimes say, that's still developing. And research is actually showing that the prefrontal cortex, that rational part of the brain, is only fully developed by the mid-20s, right? By mid-to-late 20s. So it kind of explains maybe even some of the questionable things we might have done in our teens and 20s because we weren't always thinking rationally. Now, what this means is that when we begin to know that actually when they're feeling those big feelings, for them, it is a really big feeling. It is a very intense feeling because they don't yet have the words or the tools, and their brain isn't fully developed yet to help them have that sense of rationality or clarity or the problem solving that we'd like them to have. And when I discovered this, when I learned this, it just made such a shift in terms of how I would engage in the connections that I'd have with children, particularly children that I work with who really struggled with those big fiery emotions. And a quote that kind of always puts things back into perspective for me is, my child isn't giving me a hard time, my child's having a hard time. And I think, it definitely just helps get that little bit of perspective that actually they're caught up in this emotional hub of the brain, and they don't yet have all of the knowledge, the resources, and the way of thinking the way that I do. Now, by the way, this definitely doesn't give your child a get out of jail card, you know, where they're like, well, I threw my brother off the sofa and it's not my fault because, you know, my upstairs brain or my thinking brain, as I'll share with you, is not fully developed. Absolutely not. Boundaries and all of those things are still important. But a way that you can share this with your child is something that is actually taken from the work of Dr. Daniel Siegel. So he's got some fantastic resources, and it's called Flipping Your Lid. And when I explain it to children, and I've even used this with some teens that I work with as well, is we make a fist with our hand and imagining that this hand is like your brain. And this top part, as I refer to it, is your thinking brain. This is the part of your brain that helps you to think, to problem solve, to make those smart choices, to focus, to pay attention. And on the inside, we've got that feeling brain where we feel all of those big feelings. Now, normally the two parts work together. But let's say, for example, you're busy with a tricky problem and you can't solve it. You get more and more agitated, or something's coming up that you feel really nervous about. And then before you know it, maybe you freeze, you can't think straight, or you shout, or those big emotional outbursts take place. In that moment, what happened is that we flipped our lid. And when we flip our lid, that thinking brain's not in charge and that feeling brain has taken over. And I think, this is a great starting point to begin to connect with your child, talking about some of those uncomfortable situations or moments or feelings that we have, but explaining actually what's going on inside your brain. And equally, if mummy or daddy have flipped their lid previously, we can say, actually, do you know what? Mummy's learned today, this is what happened. And actually, I flipped my lid. But now, what can we start to do? What could we begin to look at that could support us to keep that lid switched on more often, or to help our lid stay calm? So I'd highly recommend, do go home and share this with your child. Families that I've worked with have really come up with some great conversations and finding out, what are some of those things that causes me to flip my lid, and so forth. Now, knowing this, having that understanding that, their brain is still developing, they are caught up in that emotional hub of the brain. Just as a self-reflection, what's been your go-to response in these situations? Maybe there have been times when you've tried to control them, and sometimes we have to just get out of the door because we're going to be late for school, but that might not always, get the result that we wanted. Or maybe you try to dissolve the situation by saying, oh, but don't worry, you don't need to be scared, you'll be fine. And that all comes from a very good and loving place. And maybe you've even said those three little words, just calm down. And we know how effective those words can be. And perhaps you found that, in some situations, these strategies might work. But in other moments, have there been times where no amount of problem solving, no amount of distraction is actually working? And maybe it even makes things worse. And the reason for this is because what children want most, and even us as adults in these moments, what they want most is connection. They want to feel heard and understood. So my next suggestion to you is to try and meet them where they're at. Now that we know a little bit more about the brain development, and my invitation is to try and meet them in that emotional hub of the brain. And the way to do this is to validate what they feel. So even using our words and saying, I can see this is really frustrating for you. I understand that you're nervous about going to a new school. It can feel really scary. By validating what they feel, what we're doing is we're allowing the space for the feeling. They're getting the message that my feeling matters. I feel heard. I feel understood. And somebody gets me, someone understands. So the way that we can go about beginning to validate their feeling is through using our words to help them as well make sense of the world around them. And I always encourage the families that I work with, this validation, helping children to build their emotional vocabulary, you saying what you see they are feeling. This is an ongoing process, and definitely start off young and then keep, adding those emotional vocabulary words, and you can keep adding to them through the different stages of their development. But let's say, for example, your child is struggling with a spelling problem and they try and they fail and they try and they fail and they get more and more frustrated, and then they get so mad that they scrunch up the paper and they throw it across the room. And this has actually happened with quite a few of the clients that I work with. What we can do then in terms of how validation can look is by actually saying something along the lines of, I understand this is really tricky, isn't it? Solving those spelling problems can be so hard and can be really frustrating when we can't get it right. And you know what? You got so mad that you took your paper and you scrunched it up and you threw it across the room. And then you say to them, you retrieve the paper and you say, why don't we take a break and we come back and we solve it together a little bit later on? Through repeated use of something like this, you're helping them, first of all, make sense of what's going on, but you're also helping them understand that their behavior of scrunching their paper and throwing it is underpinned by that emotion of frustration. And that is underpinned by that feeling that I can't, that physical aspect of I can't access this problem yet, I can't do this yet. And through the repeated experience of this, like I said, we're helping them to make sense of the world around them. They also begin to understand that their behavior is underpinned by a feeling, and they can begin to use their words to say how I think and feel. And this can sometimes take a long time. I even know for myself, and I don't know, Matt, if you can relate, in all the work that you do in mental health, and this is my world, but sometimes I will behave in a way and think, hold on, what was it that I was really feeling? And I think, the more we're able to support our children from that younger age, obviously that aids in helping them build their emotional awareness, but also helps deepen our connection with them. And so my starting point to you is, when you notice them in a feeling, we're not trying to fix it, try to validate it and just notice and name the feeling that you're seeing. And how this can feel for them. If I can invite you to think about, think back to a time when you perhaps felt an intense emotion. Maybe you were really frustrated, or you were really angry about something, and you told someone else and they said to you, just calm down. I mean, I know that when that happens to me, if my husband says that to me when I start to get, have my big feelings, it does anything but calm me down. Sometimes it actually makes it even worse. Whereas if somebody just has to say, you know what, I understand why you're feeling frustrated. I get why you're feeling this way. It starts to kind of bring that down a little bit. It doesn't take it away, but we have that sense of connection, that feeling of validation where we feel heard and understood. And then, my final strategy in terms of, how can we go about connecting more with our children is, I think there can be so much pressure. And I hear this often from parents, I've got to spend quality time with my child. And absolutely, that's important. But let's be honest, pandemic aside, let's not even throw the pandemic into this. We've been pulled into so many different directions, and there's so many different demands that are pulling on our time that sometimes when we get to the end of the day, it almost feels like there's not much left to give. So my invitation to you, instead of that pressure of I've got to spend quality time, can you start to find moments of, quality moments, pockets of quality moments in your day that don't need to take a lot of time, something like 10 to 15 minutes. And if you're able to do this more consistently, that's going to have a much greater effect than if, for example, we spend an hour and a half on a Tuesday and then we don't come back to that until, a few weeks later. Because the thing is, when we do little and often, we're predictable for our children. If we're predictable, we're safe. And if we're safe, if they're safe, that connection is secure. So the quality moments can look different. Obviously, I've got a few suggestions here, but different ways to connect. And it sounds really easy, but it's not always easy to do. And I definitely put myself in this as well. Being fully present. Are there moments, and I appreciate we can't do this all the time, otherwise things won't get done. But is there a moment, 10 minutes in your day, that you can just be fully present with your child? Put your mobile device down, put the TV off, stop the multitasking, listen to what they're saying. Because so often we also want to solve the problems, and that's part of our role as a parent. But are there opportunities where we could actually maybe probe their questioning a little bit more, saying, I wonder what made you think that? Or tell me more about why you feel like that. And, really get engaged and listen to what they have to say. Be curious. And I think majority of just a tip, if you've got teens or tweens, I predominantly work with the primary age. But one of the great ways to keep that connection open with teens, because they do go through that period where they just don't want to be with you and they want to be with their tribes. And this does take a bit of practice. I'm not saying you might need to work on this yourself. is, if possible, try to practice that sense of being non-judgmental. So, if your teen does come to you and says, oh, my friend Sophie did so-and-so, it's very easy. I mean, I've done this too with, clients that were like, oh, put your eye, like, oh. But what we really want to do there is maybe be curious and think, oh, wonder what made Sophie do that? What do you think's going on for her? Because if we can practice that sense of being non-judgmental as well, that also lets our children know it's safe to come and talk to you. I do have some more resources if you have got teens. So there's some great resources that I will share with you shortly. Another way as well, become interested in their hobbies. Now, kids love telling you what to do. Whenever I teach children flipping your lid, my task to them is go and tell mommy or daddy about it too. And they love reminding parents, oh, remember, let's try keeping, what can we do to keep that lid engaged a little bit more often? So get them to teach you, get interested in their hobbies. I'm not a big fan for video games, but I understand that technology is here. We've got to work with it rather than against it. So get your child to teach you how Minecraft or Roblox or whatever works, right? And we even just tell them, I'm just going to sit here. I really want to know how this works. I'm just going to sit here and watch you play. If they let you do that, or, get interested in something else that they might be doing. Let them take the lead. But I think it's really important to kind of just have that just 10 to 15 minutes where we just get fully present, fully engaged. Something else that's also really useful, and I think maybe, I might be wrong, there might have been a question in this, even in the comments that we had right at the beginning that I got prior to this, asking different questions. So often, and I hear this all the time of, what did you do today? Nothing. How was school? Fine. I was like, well, we spent 6 hours at school. You couldn't have done nothing. So a little tip. If you're struggling to get that from your child, just be mindful perhaps of when you're asking the question, because think about it. You as a parent, life is busy. Maybe you've got back-to-back meetings. You're always talking, jumping to different meetings, whatever that might be. And at the end of the day, maybe you're tired and the last thing you want to do is talk. Now, for little people, that's the same as well. And I've worked in schools for 12 years. It can be a noisy place to be. So perhaps leave these questions for later on, once they've had a moment to decompress. I've also got a handout that will be shared with you about other alternative questions you can ask your children, but try to be a little bit more specific. And what I'd say with these sorts of questions, what was tricky for you, but you didn't give up today? Or who do you want to make friends with at school, but you haven't yet? Answer those questions yourself as well. So a game that a family plays that I work with, they actually wrote down all of these questions. And I've got 25 of them on a blog as well on my site. So there's many more that you can get. And they'd write them on strips of paper. And then they choose one at dinner time, and everybody in the family would discuss, this question and ask this question in their way. But that was a great way to open up conversations, to kind of step into the world of your child a little bit more and to see things from their perspective. And finally, play. Play is our children's language. And I love this quote, children don't say, I had a hard day at school, can I talk to you about it? They say, will you play with me? Now, I'm not putting this up on here to guilt trip anyone. I put this post up on Instagram the other day and some parents came back saying, I feel so guilty, I don't play. Absolutely not. Things need to get done, right? That's not it at all. But what might be useful to keep at the forefront of your mind is that actually play is how children communicate. Play is how children make sense of experiences, and it comes out through their play. And it's also really crucial for brain development. It builds creativity, imagination, empathy, resilience, helps them to make sense of their experience. And if you're starting to feel a little bit, oh my gosh, but how do I play? And that's another thing. I've got some resources that are going to give you a quick, easy guide that's going to give you different play ideas that you can put in just for 10 to 15 minutes a day. So don't worry. And they don't have to all be messy either. So that, that kind of sums it up in terms of some of the suggestions on how we can begin to deepen that connection with our children. On a final note, I think it's just really important, and I touched on this at the beginning, is please be compassionate with yourself. As I said before, there is no rule book and no manual that comes along with your child, as great as that would be. And you're very much a learner alongside with your child. My invitation to you is, know that you're going to get it right, you're going to get it wrong, but you're probably going to get it more right than what you will wrong. And good enough is good enough. So as we wrap up, I'd love to know, and I think we've got another poll coming up, but just to quickly give you the top tips here. We've looked at managing your expectations. So really just understanding and being mindful that their brain is still developing and we've got a way to go with this. Teaching, flipping your lid. We also looked at trying to meet them where they're at, so validating those emotions, and also beginning to, instead of that quality time, can you start to find quality moments throughout your day? So I'd love to know, what's one action that you can begin to implement this next week? And I think we have a poll that's going to be coming up. What's perhaps your one key takeaway that you can commit to taking after this webinar? Sorry. Yeah, quality moments. And I've got some fab resources as well. Sorry. Managing the expectations. Yep, meeting your children where they're at. Great. Well, I'm excited. Small bite-sized bits, small bite-sized things. Thank you. So Matt, yes, don't know if we've got any questions perhaps, if we're moving on to Q&A.
We do, yeah. I think first off, thank you so much. There was so much to take away in there, and also thank you for the care and effort that you put into the session today. I know that I'll be putting as much of that into action as I can. We've got a lot of questions, and I'm going to run through them with you now. And thank you for everyone engaging in the chat as well. It's wonderful to see people sharing ideas as well. That's what it's about. There's no such thing as a perfect parent, I think, is the subtext of what you were saying, and we're all in this together almost. Well, we are. There was one question you raised actually throughout, Natalie, where you said, had I had experience of recognizing when I get frustrated or why I react in certain ways? And the flipping the lid analogy or concept that you discussed is something that was introduced to me a while ago. And when I could understand that from a child's perspective, like my 2-year-old would have a tantrum and throw things and just look red, ugly, cry. When it dawned on me that they didn't know why they felt like that, my heart broke, and that helped me not get frustrated in reaction to that. But I've translated that into my own life in that I still get frustrated. I'm still short-tempered. If I am able to catch myself in the moment and say, wait, why are you getting frustrated with a 4.5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old who are wholly dependent upon you that you chose to bring into this world? It kind of diffuses myself. And I'm like, I'm frustrated because I'm worried about missing something that's happening in 20 minutes time. Like, stop it. Live, be very in the moment. And it, maybe 5 times out of 10, I can catch myself because no one's perfect. But to your question, that's where my mind went to, and I feel I'm probably talking in a similar way to what a lot of people who are on this webinar are thinking as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the things we will flip our lid too, that's just, we're human. That's going to happen. This is absolutely not about not flipping it. And I think actually what's so powerful is there are many instances, when I think of a client that I'm working with at the moment who is like, I just got really angry and I yelled at him. But then we were able to go back afterwards, because there's no point in that moment. It's sort of like, just have to kind of let the bad gasoline go through the system, right? Like work through the system. But afterwards, when we've come back to calm, that's when we can then talk about it. And that's where the connection takes place and the understanding takes place. And I think there, and again, it goes back to what I said before about you're a continuing, an ongoing learner as well. And I think, just for parents, for us as adults, parents, as caregivers, thinking actually, how do I make sure that I'm okay too? Because I'm sure you can recognize that maybe those moments when you do get more frustrated or, you flip your lid, Matt, it's because maybe there's a lot more on your plate, or simple things like you've not slept well, you've not nourished yourself. And all of those things, whilst we think they might not be a big deal, they kind of stack up. And so it's also really important, I think, that we look, we look after ourselves as well. Because I think what can so often happen is this tendency, I'll put myself last. But I think what's really important is actually I'm also important, because if I look after myself, then that's going to help raise my children's cup even more, if that makes sense.
It does, absolutely. And I think be kind to yourself, right? Like I think everyone would recognize that you're more short-tempered or short on patience when you're tired, or when you're not eating well, or you're not feeling particularly healthy. And mental well-being is a whole person concept. It relates to your psychological life, your thoughts, emotions, your physical life, and your social life, and the cultural element of it. So look after yourself, be kind to yourself, because it's going to allow you to apply yourself more to the parenting aspect of your place in this world.
Yeah.
I am keen to move on to the questions. I am starting to lose control of the kind of chat and questions that are coming in. So I'm going to caveat that we will do our best to get through as many of them as they can. As a father, reading some of these questions, they are really pulling on my heartstrings, and to the degree that we will get to them today, we will. If we can't, we'll endeavor to point you in the direction of resources that may be helpful for that topic, or in fact, reach out afterwards if there's anything that comes to mind that we have that's really, really relevant. So thank you for those that have opened up and put conversations in here, particularly one around a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old that are constantly battling. That's exactly my life right now. So we may come on to that one shortly. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that question. But I'm going to start off here with a question from Ruth, and thank you, Ruth, for putting this in the Q&A. So often when I try to talk to my daughter, so age 6, when she's frustrated / trying to validate her feelings, it's really hard to even get her to listen to what I'm saying. Instead, she's too busy shouting at, or so busy shouting at me that she doesn't like it, telling me that my talking is making it worse and she can't even hear me. So do you have any advice on how to connect when a child won't even allow you to speak, and perhaps stop internalizing their feelings?
Good question. Great question. And, I've been there too. And it's really hard to be on the receiving end of those loud vibrations that come from the little people. What I would say there is, and obviously I don't quite know all the ins and outs of it, and this was actually going back a couple of years. I worked with a mum and a daughter who struggled with something similar like this, is saying, validating. So, I can see you're feeling right. It's okay to be angry right now because we've got to pack up and leave. And then even saying something like, I'm right here with you until you need me. So you validate the feeling and you just say, I'm right here. I'll wait here until you're ready. Or I'm right here waiting. She's told you don't talk. And that leads on to something else. So what I would suggest is perhaps when you are playing a game or you're just spending some nice time together, talk about, so you remember that time last week when, we had some of those big feelings and you got a bit sad and upset. Mummy really wants to know, what are some things that can help you? Is it, do you maybe want to hug when we feel those big feelings? Do you want Mummy to leave? Do you maybe just want Mummy to sit quietly? Because I know we all want different things. And, think about it for yourself. Some of us are tactile. I know I need hugs, but other people, they need a bit of space. So don't be afraid to ask your daughter what she might think would help. You might need to give her some suggestions, but you might also be pleasantly surprised at what she tells you. And there, what she's telling me, from what it sounds like, is don't talk. So all I would say is, okay, I can see that you're angry right now. I love you. I'm right here until you need me. And it's not going to take that feeling away. But what I'd suggest is just stay in the room, or if she has told you to leave, but just be that calm space for her. Be that calm space. And what I sometimes do in those moments is I will do my deep breathing and I'll just focus on my breathing to make sure that I stay really calm. And another tip as well that I picked up from a colleague of mine is actually try to speak really low. So try and imagine that your voice is coming here, because what we tend to do very easily is it goes, so try to come down really low. Like I said, I'd love to say it's a magic wand. We can't be a millionaire by now if it was. But how I'd like you to maybe think of it is just one thing. This might help a few other parents as well. If we think of being on an aeroplane, right, and there's a lot of turbulence, we're looking at the pilot and the air stewards to see what their reactions are. If they're all worked up, that makes us feel more stressed. But if they're calm, we're calmer. I don't know about me, I'll be up in the sky, but we'll have more of a sense of calmer space, right? But my point is, they're looking to you. So if we can model, and this will take everything out of you, and you're not always going to get it right. So just be mindful of that. But I hope that those are some suggestions that can begin to help.
Yeah, I think they're really interesting. And I kind of follow on from that. There's a question about how I find that I struggle in difficult moments to keep my cool. And what you described was, keep you cool. And then you can maybe do your breathing exercises. Do you have any other suggestions to help me as a parent? Asking for a friend was the question that came in.
Yes. And this is something that, well, there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, we spoke about making sure your well-being, how are you nourished, being mindful of that. Knowing that if you do get resentful because you maybe don't give yourself the workout time, make that a priority, because you know that you'll show up better for your family, for your children, if you give yourself that 40 minutes to work out. In the moment, I would say, definitely practicing things like, and I talk a lot about, when I teach children and parents, self-soothing strategies, taking those deep belly breaths. Because when we obviously breathe from our chest, we start to, activate the stress and the cortisol. So we want to consciously drop into our diaphragm and take those deep belly breaths. One of the clients I actually work with, she does I've taught them take 5 breathings. So where you hold out your palm, and as we breathe in, you trace up. As you breathe out, you trace back down. You breathe in and trace up and go back down. So mum has actually started to use this when her son was having those big moments. And over the period of time, he's now started to follow her along. And, they both do it together. So maybe that's, that deep breathing. And something else as well. So a strategy that I also use, and it was a mantra that I came across. It was, I soften into this moment, which sounds so absurd when you're in this state. But think about it. If there is all of that resistance and we meet it with more resistance, there's just going to be more resistance. But if we just, I'm just going to kind of soften into this moment. I found that that's really helped me personally. And I think, because it just comes, okay. And we've also got to remember, it goes up, 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 but it's going to come back down again. And if we can just, and these will be little things. And like I said, you'll be building on them. So this is a new habit that you're trying to instill. So perhaps those might be a few other strategies.
Wonderful. That really resonates. I think one thing that I learned was, and this was from a series on Unmind actually, is whenever a frustration boiled over, and a lot of people say, I'll just let the tantrum ride out. I think what you've shown is engage and acknowledge at the same time, but in your head, if you can, double the amount of time that you're willing to spend on acknowledging, engaging, and waiting. And I found it was fascinating that when Madeline would have a tantrum, I would count and give it 30 seconds. And then in my mind, that's when I flipped my lid. I'm like, oh, it's never going to work. It's blah, blah, blah. But then I was like, right, maybe if I count to 90, and to watch your child cry and for 90 seconds is the worst thing in the world, right? And to watch any child cry for that long. But then all of a sudden, like to your point around the brain parts, the rational and the emotional, things started to calm down. And lo and behold, 3 minutes later, we're out running around giggling in the backyard. Like, it's children, right? So I think one real, and I am by no means an expert here, but just doubling the amount of time that you're acknowledging, engaging, and that could be an extra 30 seconds. It's amazing how much of a difference it makes.
I love that, because it's a muscle. It's a muscle, like we're that tolerance muscle, that patience muscle, right? We're just adding a few more reps to that. That's all we're doing. So, think of it like that perhaps as well. I think that's a really good way to, and it helps, I think, us as adults just to be, that's where my focus is, because then the focus could so easily shift to all of these things taking place, and where we could take it quite personally and things like that. So I think that's a really great, I'm going to use that too.
It doesn't work all the time, but every little helps. Maybe a curveball question for you here, but a lot has come in about sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
And this may not be an area of expertise for you, and we can certainly find resources afterwards, but perhaps from the younger age, and I think a couple of people mentioned around the 5-year-old, 6-year-old age, any tips for sibling rivalry and how to manage those situations?
Yeah. Where do I start? And it's really difficult, I think, but it's a good question because it's something that comes up, and I think especially this last year there was a lot of it because children and siblings were on top of each other. What I would say, what I see a lot from my side when I work with children is the jealousy of siblings. The older brother and sister can do things so much easier than me. And I think what's really important there is to, first of all, highlight the important, and of course we do this as parents, I'm not at all suggesting we don't, but spend that quality time, if possible, with each child separately, highlighting, building up, their strengths, their characteristics, the unique things, the unique things that make them them. So when it comes to that sense of jealousy, what I sometimes try to do with children is thinking, and I use ice cream flavors a lot as an analogy and say, how boring would the world be if we just had, peppermint flavored ice cream? We need salted caramel. We need all the strawberry bubble gum, whatever it is. And that's the same with us. Imagine you and your brother were exactly the same. Even if we've got twins, we're still separate. And then beginning to unpick, well, what are the good things that you can do? Where are you, what are the areas that you can complement your brother or sister in? What I'd also suggest, if they're not really getting along, could you look in terms of getting them to work together as a team, perhaps even in a friendly rivalry way, kids versus parents, where they sort of feel like they're forming this, you have to be very mindful of how we dance with this. But this has definitely worked for some siblings that I've worked with, in terms of they collectively like, oh, well, we're challenging mum and dad tonight on this activity, and it's maybe just a game to start build, it might be a game of, I don't know, Monopoly or whatever it is, it's kids versus parents to start building those connections of team building. And then a strategy that I sometimes use with siblings was just about I don't know if anyone's familiar with the kindness bucket. There's a lovely book about how full is your bucket, and it's all about kindness. And when we are kind to others, we fill up their bucket and our bucket fills up as well. So this is quite a nice visual activity for children, that if I do something genuine and kind, or I give a compliment, or I help my brother or I help my sister, I'm filling up their bucket, and we can put a marble in a jar, and I'm filling up my bucket as well, and trying to see, how full can we make these buckets? So those are some suggestions.
Wonderful, thank you. And yeah, they're very, very helpful. I'm reflecting on, as everyone will who'll be listening to this, on their own experiences. And I know that is something that is becoming more and more of a challenge at the minute as they get older and they hit those age of 3, 5, 6, and whatever it may be. Again, I'm in awe of people helping each other on the chat. Thank you so much for crowdsourcing these questions and ideas. I'm excited to read through them, actually, because there's a lot of interesting tips there. I think probably time for one more question, and it relates to asking different questions, the point that you raised earlier as a cool tactic. So the question is, I often ask, what made you smile today? Or who made you laugh today? And I'll get no one. Or I'll ask, tell me one good thing, one bad thing, and a great thing about today. And I'll get, everything was great. Then I may get, I don't belong anywhere. So the question is, am I asking the wrong questions, or would play help here? Like what would you think about that?
Definitely not the wrong questions. And I think, there are some children that I work with that they can never find any good in the day. So it's maybe what I would suggest, and I'm not sure how old your child is, maybe flip it on its head and get your child to say, so today when you go to school, and I sometimes send kids on a scavenger hunt, where I'm like, you've got to find 3 things today that made you smile, or you've got to find 1 thing today, where you were brave, or when you did a tricky thing. That might, then that's kind of like on their focus. So see if that might help, and then at the end of the day, you could reflect on that. And then, yes, going back to the second part of the question, absolutely with play. I mean, you'll be surprised, I think, in terms of how well, I'm not saying you, I'm actually surprised. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I'm always surprised at what comes out when children are actually engaged in a game or playing, or we're maybe just doing something not even related to anything, and a conversation comes up. So I think, if you're feeling play might be something, I definitely say explore that, or doing an activity collaboratively together, maybe when you're cooking, or if you're maybe doing, maybe like an arts and craft together as well. But I would say maybe try see if you could flip that on its lid and turn that into a game where you're going to do it as well. So today when I go to work, I'm going to try and find one thing that was tricky, but I didn't give up. Or I'm going to find 3 things that made me smile. And what might also be useful is maybe writing these down then, so that children have like a running record then of the good things or the tricky things or the challenges that they face as that visual reminder as well. So yeah.
Wonderful. I love that. Thank you. I lied. I'm going to do one last quick question before we wrap up. Based on the kids that you've worked with and clients, etc., this question is, what are the key milestones in my child's life that I should be aware of when they might need a little more support from me?
I would say what instantly springs to mind there is if your child is behaving or different to what they normally would, I would say that might be a sign. Is there some additional support we need? And I'm assuming here emotional support, not really academic support and things like that.
Right.
Bear in mind as well, tweens, and I see this younger and younger, especially a lot with girls, where it starts, they start to almost be their foot. One camp is, yes, I still want to be your baby girl, and then the next moment, don't want to hear from you, slam the door. And it can feel, because people think, but they're only like 9 or 10, or sometimes even 8. But there is a resource that I'll recommend that goes a lot more into how you can support that stage of development as well. But I would say, always, I think, like I said before, we're always growing, always learning. I think if we can keep that connection secure, keep that communication, that door open communication policy as much as possible. And I appreciate that we're learning this as well, because maybe we didn't experience this. And I think as well, in terms of emotional support, if you're thinking of the little ones, I start to generally work with children from age 6 and up, end of secondary school. Obviously, that transition from primary to secondary, yes. And also that transition from nursery reception into year 1. And funny, where we live now, they've got a different tier system. So I think if anyone's in the UK, here we've got, I think we've got year 1, year 2, and year 3, and then there's a separate school for 4, 5, 6, 7, and then there's a separate one for the rest of them. So I'd say all of those like transition times as well is really useful.
Yeah, perfect. You actually, I was going to say, for our US audience, I was going to translate to pre-K, kindergarten, elementary, but what you described in the second scenario is quite common in the US schooling system over here as well. Natalie, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I wish we had more time to answer some of these questions. Some of these questions are incredibly important questions, and people have been very open. I appreciate everyone in the chat helping us out by doing some crowdsourcing and answering and giving top tips. Thank you. But Natalie, how can we stay in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm often on Instagram. So come and say hi over there, Power Thoughts NC. I mean, feel free to email me as well. I'm on LinkedIn too. My website is there, powerthoughts.co.uk. So everything is there. I've also got a few books out. So these are activity books for children around confidence, mindset, know your feelings. And I've got a group coaching program that's starting in the autumn term, specifically for parents and children when it comes to navigating the big feelings, tools to help children understand a lot of what we spoke about today, and equally giving parents those strategies too. So if you are interested in that, just sign up to I think there'll be PDFs and links that will be sent out. In terms of other resources that I've got for you, so play, I promised you some play resources, because I know that, how do I come up with play? Joanna Fortune's fantastic author, and she does a whole wealth of other things, but she's written something called the 15-minute parenting guide, I think, and she's got she's got a parenting guide for 0 to 7, and then I think from 8 to 12, and then 13 onwards, and it's different play ideas for all of those different age groups, which I just think it's really easy, digestible, gives you lots of different ideas. And like I said, it takes 10 to 15 minutes. And then I'm aware, there are some parents on here that have got teenagers. I predominantly focus mostly on primary sector. I do work with some teens, but my caveat is that they need to want to have the support. So that's the only important thing. But some fantastic resources that I could share with you is Untangled by Lisa D'Amour. Now she's written this specifically for parents who've got daughters, and it's explaining the transition from your tweens into adulthood. Really useful and insightful when it comes to what's happening in the brain, and why they behave the way that they do, why our daughters behave the way that they do. In saying that, I've read the book, and it's definitely, you're going to benefit even if you have a boy. But that, so that's a very useful resource. And she's also got a few others in terms of stress and teenagers and stress, so do go and check her out. And then Dr. Daniel Siegel as well, Brainstorm, talks a lot about the teenage brain and helps us understand that world as well. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Natalie. There's some fantastic resources there. Thank you for sharing. So for those Unmind users, actually, if you haven't already found it yet, do also check out the Positive Parenting series in the relationship section on the platform. It's full of fascinating information that will make you think differently about your children's mental health and subsequently your relationship with them. Plus, there's some really great practical advice that I still live by today. So the recording of this webinar will be available in a day or two. So that'll either be arriving in your inbox, or it's also accessible through the platform for those that have access to it. Natalie, I want to say thank you again for such a wonderful session. You put a lot of time, effort, care, and love into this, and I know a lot of people are taking a lot of things away for it. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who spent some time with us today. Have a great rest of your day. Go hug your kids and take care.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Matt. Thank you very much.